Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Fire Up Michigan. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth, appropriately named, considering that's where I'm from, anyways. And we have a special guest tonight, somebody I've known a long, long time, Tom Gage. Tommy and I met over at the baseball winter meetings in '81, and we've struck up a good friendship that's lasted a long, long time. So, Tommy, glad to have you as our special guest tonight.
That was over in Hollywood, wasn't it?
Boy, you really are sharp.
Yeah,
At the old
I
diplomat.
remember that. I remember those winter meetings very well.
Yeah, at the old Diplomat Hotel, they had to redo it when a
Diplomat,
hurricane.
yep, yep.
Yeah, when they did. And George Eichhorn, well, get to see him a few times a week. Welcome back, George.
Good to be here, and good to see you, Tom, again. I know our paths haven't crossed too much lately, but great having you on, Tom.
And
Good
maybe
to see
later
you,
in the show, Jeremy Ballreich might join us. I know he's en route to go back home from picking his folks up at the airport. So, Tommy, it's so great to see you again. You're really looking great. And, you know, the one thing I can honestly tell you is this, and I really mean this from the bottom of my heart all the way to the top, that how time flies back in the baseball winter meetings and that our friendship has lasted as long as it has.
Yeah, that was 81. So what? That's 42 years ago.
Yeah,
And
that's
sometimes I think of things that happened in the 80s, and they just seem like yesterday. I think we probably all think of 1984 that way. That doesn't seem that long ago. The joy and the fun that the Tigers were that year, but they haven't done much of anything in the last 40 years.
No, they haven't. Well, you know what? I've always appreciated the industrious compliment in Bradenton, Florida, when we met for lunch. All right, what was the name of that restaurant again?
In Bradenton?
Yeah.
Was that the Sandbar?
Was it? I don't know. But yeah, as a matter of fact, it was. That was really where
Yeah.
it's at. So,
I like
well,
I like a lot of places in Bradenton, especially in the Anna Maria Island area.
yeah, Bradenton's a really good town. Well, you know what? We got a guy already who's waiting to ask you some questions. Will Vogel, I'm going to put it up on the screen. George, you can go ahead and read it, and then there you go.
All right. Will says, thank you for answering my questions. Well, we haven't answered all of them yet, Will, but he wants to know about the great Detroit history, Tom, with the guys like Ty Cobb, Al Kaline, Mickey Lolich, Lou Whitaker, Hank Greenberg, and Alan Trammell, of course.
Right. That's the other half of it. So
who was the ball player that wasn't in the spotlight and wasn't really a superstar, but one of your favorites, Tom, to cover?
Well, one of my favorites to cover was Tombrookens, and you just talk about he wasn't a journeyman, but he was. I mean, he wasn't a star on the team of the '80s, but Tombrookens was a delight to cover because he had a great sense of humor. He knew his place on that team. He didn't put on airs. He didn't think he was better than he was, but then again, he didn't think he was worse than he was. He just he was a good player, not a star, but every time I spoke to him, he was just a delight to speak to because he was very cooperative, but he also had a great sense of humor. And Mickey Tettleton did too, but a decade later. But Mickey was funny every time if you laughed at his jokes and he saw that you were writing something down in your notebook, he would say, "Well, you're not going to write that, are you?" And so much of what Mickey Tettleton had to say didn't get printed because he didn't want to. He got nervous. He got nervous about what he had just said, even though most of the time it was very harmless. He was just funny.
And Tom, on that '84 team, you mentioned Brookens, but we also had Marty Castillo. So refresh our memory and our listeners and viewers. Did they share third base a lot that '84 season?
Yeah, and they did, and also Howard Johnson.
Oh yeah.
Much of the time, George, it was a division between Howard Johnson's future and what Sparky wanted, where Sparky wanted to go with that, and Tombrookens just filling in capably. Finally, against left-handed pitching, they played Brookens on a regular basis, and I think they kind of towards the end of the season they kind of put Howard Johnson in the background. Even though even though he had a pretty good year, I don't think he contributed much towards the end.
Yeah.
All right, so Tom, let me ask you, give me your top Tigers moments of all time.
Oh, what'd you say, Scott?
Top Tigers moments.
I think the top moment had to be, the fly ball to Larry Herndon and left that, and all those guys streaming out of the dugout, and the joy that 1984 brought to everybody. My first year of covering the Tigers at all, I covered them for about a month and a half in 1976, and that was right in the middle of the Fidrych mania, and it was a delight to watch Fidrych because he was such a he was such a capable pitcher. He was he was kind of an oddball. I mean, he talked to the ball, and he built little mounds of dirt on the mound. But this kid could pitch, and I remember Claudell Washington. I think Claudell was on the Oakland A's at the time, and Claudell Washington thought he was going to be the one to slow down Fidrych's pace, because Fidrych liked to work fast and not let hitters get comfortable in the box. And Claudell Washington thought, okay, you're not going to get the better of me. You're going to pitch at my pace, and I'm going to slow you down. So Washington took a long time to set up in the box, and Bird got down on his haunches, and you could see he was losing patience. And finally, Claudell was ready to swing the bat. He wouldn't pass all the clocks that they have on hitters now today. But so the Bird got ready to pitch, and the first pitch was right at Claudell Washington's knees and back. He didn't hit him, and it wasn't he wasn't a headhunter, but he knew exactly where to put the pitch, and that was the message to Claudell Washington. No, this is my game, not your game. And at that moment, I realized just what a capable and really talented pitcher markfidrych was, because he put the ball exactly where he wanted.
Yeah, I can tell you right now that Rob Manfred would love to have Mark the Bird Fidrych, wouldn't he? Trying to speed up the game. And we'll talk about the rule changes a little bit later, but let's face the reality. Yeah. Rob Manfred, Mark the Bird Fidrych, can you just only imagine that?
I also covered, Jack Morris's no-hitter, and was there for that. I also covered Disco Demolition Night, and that was a wild game.
Wild Bill Veeck, huh?
Well, usually, George, odd things happen at Comiskey Park, and there was that game. There was a game in which Ed Farmer threw Al Collins was at the plate, and and Ed Farmer got him to ground out to short, but instead of running to first base, Al Collins ran to the mound, and he didn't. And he meant to hit Farmer, but all he did was end up scratching him. But Farmer, he blamed Farmer for a pitch that had hit him and hurt him earlier in the year when Collins was still with the Kansas City Royals before they got him in a trade. But boy, that was certainly an odd game.
Yeah, for sure.
So Tommy, let's talk about the 1984 team. What was it that made that team so special? You had obviously Chet Lemon coming as Sparkyanderson. We all know what a great manager was and the way he handled his pitching staff, and the list goes on and on.
Well, the big thing, Scott, really took place in spring training, because the 1984 team finished as a confident team in 1983, and they knew they were going to come to spring training thinking that they had a chance to win. And so that team in spring training was a confident, not a cocky team, but a very confident team, and they knew they were a talented team. And when they made the trade for Bergman and Willie Hernandez at the end of spring training, that was the piece that really, not Aurelio for most of the beginning of the season was a better relief pitcher than Willie Hernandez. I mean,
Right.
let's not forget the contributions that Lopez made to the team. But frankly, towards the end of May, that's when Guillermo took over, and he became, he did what he did, and he was a huge contributor with that screwball. And Dave Bergman, of course, was a fantastic role player and a very smart player and a good fielder, and he was a huge contributor to that team. So it was a good trade.
And then Tom, that 35-5 start. Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
I mean, that was just remarkable.
Oh, I remember I remember what happened in Anaheim, and the Tigers had just beaten the Angels to go 34-5, George, and Sparky got off the team bus at the team hotel, and a guy came up to him. You probably know this story, and said, "Hey, Sparkyanderson, I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and I was just a huge Big Red Machine fan." And so Sparky, in his gracious way, was thanking him and stuff like that. And the guy went on and on about the Cincinnati Reds. And he said, "Well, I just wanted to say hello, Sparky, that I was a big Reds fan from Dayton. What are you doing now?" So,
Wow.
So here the Tigers are on the verge of being 35-5, and Sparky was managing the hottest team in the universe, and this guy didn't even know he was the manager of the Tigers.
That's a great story.
It was a funny moment. It really was.
Tommy, I hate to ask this question because I know it's a difficult one, but were there any particular players or two on that 84 team that you could classify as favorite? I hate to use the word favorite because that was yeah.
Well, I mean, Alan Trammell's just a great individual. I liked Alan Trammell a lot. I've already talked about Brookens. I got along with Lanceparrish, with whom, by the way, Scott, I'm writing a book about 1984. It'll be out next year. Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, it's my fourth book in retirement, and I didn't think I was going to write another one, but the publisher called and said they wanted to observe the 40th anniversary of the 1984 team and would I consider being co-authoring with Lance. So I talk to Lance now once a week, and we put together chapters, and he's all for the project, and I'm all for the project. So publishing being what it is, they need all winter the copy is due in September, and it'll come out about Father's Day next year. But I wrote a book with, as you've alluded to, Scott, with Mickey Lolich about 1968, and now I'll have one about 1984. But I really related. I mean, I didn't cover the 68 team, and I did cover the 84 team, so I knew that team forwards and backwards. I didn't get along with Jackmorris until later on in his career. Many of his teammates didn't get along with Jack. Was just so, I mean, and I realized later in his career and later in mine that the trouble with Jack was he was just as competitive with the writers as he was with opposing hitters. And so midway through the 84 season, he stopped talking to the writers because he began to, he got off to a fast start, and then he kind of slumped, and then he began to talk again. But I remember he began to talk, but he told told the Free Press writer, "I'm talking to the media again, but I have to tell you, there's one guy among you that really bothers me, and that's Tom Gage." He said he knows nothing. He knows nothing about baseball. He should be covering shuffleboard instead. And I told Jack, I reminded him of that story years later, and we both had a good laugh about it because Jack mellowed on later on, and especially after his career, when he realized that for most of his career he had been a jerk. But he was a smart enough individual to realize he had been a jerk, and he changed his ways. And, you know, he also knew that if he wanted to get into the Hall of Fame with, eventually he did get in, that he, you know, it was, I don't think the writers held it against him that he was
That's what I was going to add. I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the voting members of the writers are that petty, but
Yeah.
Jack didn't know that, and he thought he had to mend some fences later on in life to get in. And but it was just emblematic, George, of how he changed his ways. He also ended up calling umpires and apologizing to umpires if he ever had treated them the wrong way. So he just turned over a new leaf. And you know, Jack's a smart individual, and he has a good heart. He's just is so competitive. It kind of becomes a controlling influence over him once in a while. And I'm happy he made. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and you've heard, and Scott and I have heard, you know, obviously he's been dumped by the Tigers television network now, Bally Sports. Were you surprised by that at all, Tom, or you know, considering that comment that he made last year and he got in trouble with? Do you think it was just time for him to move?
He got a little suspension for that. I don't know if that had, George. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not. But you know, Bally. I just read today about Bally's financial troubles, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it. I did like Jack as an announcer. He wasn't an apologist. He was not an apologist. He announced the game the way he saw it, and the way that announcers always used to anyway. And I'm not always sure they do anymore.
All right, let's go to
with Ernie Harwell, you never knew, you know, it was never positive or negative. He just gave you a great running play-by-play of what was going on in the game. And Vinscully was the same way. And, you know, and most of the great Tiger announcers of the past. I think Dan Dickerson does a fine job. But I think overall broadcasting now you can easily see that the team is the controlling influence.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
Tommy, let's go to the chat room. Jeremy Ballreich says that 84 team was amazing to watch without a doubt. So I want to go back to Lanceparrish for a minute. I remember when I was covering spring training, you remember I was there, I think it was like 83 or 84, and I had the opportunity to interview Lance. What a super, super nice guy. And it's good that he's been able to stay in the game as a minor league manager as well. And he's certainly the type of guy that I believe if he ever wanted to manage in the bigs, he probably could. So, but, you know, and I just think, and let's go to the chat room a little bit more, Tom. It's good that we get this kind of participation. We'll go back to Will Vogel. He's talks about Morris and Yastrzemski. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. You know, so these are just some of the things that we're putting out there. But I want to go over a few things that you talked about. Ernie Harwell, Tommy. Okay, Ernie is precious. He's like I always called him Uncle Ernie. He took me under his wing. You want to talk about one of the nicest guys on the planet? I don't think
he took everybody under his wing. You know, he was a major influence in my early years in baseball because he could see. You know, he could see that you were just kind of feeling your way around. You had to go into opposing dugouts. You had to talk to players you didn't know. And Ernie was just a great guiding influence in my career. And he was the kindest man I think I ever knew, and just a wonderful influence for young writers or for young players as well. And I remember one time though, Ernie had a little bit of a temper, and he was going to get in. I think the Tigers had a Kentucky Derby pool. The players were having a Kentucky Derby pool in the clubhouse, and Ernie said, "Oh, I'm going to get in. I'm going to get in." And one of the players said, "Ernie, players only." And Ernie, Joel, man. He said something quite un-Ernie-like and turned around, and he had every right to. I mean, you know, I don't think they ended up selling all the horses, but, you know, one of the players really told him, "Hey, this isn't your pool; it's our pool." And I thought, boy, it was a good player. I just said, I thought to myself, you have a lot to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And, the whole thing with Ernie and obviously the Tigers, that terrible separation. I mean, that was created such ill will with the fans, Tom. You were there covering.
But George, I think it was mended. I think it was a bad thing that happened at the time, but I don't think Ernie lasted many years after that. And I think bygones were bygones eventually, with Rick Riz and Bob, what was, I can't remember.
Rathbun.
What was his last name?
Rathbun.
Oh yeah, they were good guys, but they were put in a very difficult position, and I think they adjusted to it the best they could. But Ernie came back and was popular for many years.
Yeah, he really was, Tommy. And like I say, you can't find a much better person. And I know Mikeillitch was instrumental in getting him back on. I want to go over a few things here so that people can find us. Because it's really the one thing that, for those that are subscribing to the YouTube channel, you get the benefit of some of the guest best we can provide. And Tom Gage, to me, is not only a Hall of Fame person, but a Hall of Famer in every way, shape, or form, a Hall of Fame friend. So I'm just so delighted that we're starting the week off with one of the truly amazing baseball minds on the planet. I should point out that Fire Up Michigan can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. So also, I ask everybody to please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. We're getting there. We can certainly use all the help that we can probably get to our goal. Want to be a guest? No problem. Send topic ideas to South Florida Tribune at gmail.com. If you want to advertise, just give me a call back at 954-304-4941. And Fire Up Michigan is live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and our YouTube channel. So here you have it. All right, let's go to the chat room. Even Bill Roos had a little time to go ahead. Tom Gage.
Hey, Tom. Bill Roos says hello.
Thanks for Bill Roos. All right, Bill. Thank you very much for popping in. Hopefully, we'll be able to get you on at a later date when the situation.
You going to ask me a Red Wing question, Bill?
He's just chatting. Tom, he's not live.
Okay.
We'll hold the Red Wing question for another time.
And a subtle reminder from Jeremy B. Don't forget to like and share with all your Michigan sports team fans. Okay, there you go, Jeremy. Wish you could say it. That way my voice will last longer. Then again, now back to Jeremy B. though. Tommy, this is something that's important. He met at Tigers Fest Dan Petrie, Rick Leach. There's the name of the past. Dave Rosema, Kirkgibson, and lanceparrish. So with him mentioning Kirkgibson, what's your relationship like with Kirkgibson?
I like and admire Kirk a lot. I didn't like the first version of him, and he was immature and he was hard to get along with. But again, he had some growing up to do, but he knew it. And Kirk nowadays, he's such a smart guy. He really is. And he changed his ways, and he was easier to get along with. I remember, this was typical of Kirkgibson. I remember the Tigers lost a game because of a pop-up on the infield between home and second base that dropped in, and they lost the game because of it. And the second baseman involved was one of the nicest guys you could ever. George, you probably remember him. Scott, you might too. And that was Mick Kelleher. And the ball dropped right in front of Mick Kelleher. And I had to ask him about it after the game. And Kirk was always very protective of his teammates. He didn't, and he never looked for the credit, but he didn't like others to take the blame. And he thought my question of Mick Kelleher was too I don't know, accusatory. I liked Mick a lot, and obviously I had to ask, what happened on that play?
Yeah.
And instead of Mick yelling at me, it was Kirk who came over from his locker and yelled at me. And that was the type of butting into other people's business before, I would say, 1983 was Kirk Gibson's way. He was not just rough around the edges; he was rough, much deeper than that. And
but you know what, Tom? That reminds me, Tom, of another guy that Scott and I covered named billlaimbeer. Because billlaimbeer would do the same thing. He'd stick his nose into the locker room conversation that Scott had with Dennis Rodman, or that I had with Isaiah, and he was kind of like that too. Now that you mention it, that personality of Gibson, Lambeer was a lot like that too, because he didn't like his teammates being singled out.
But Kirk changed, and he grew up, and he had some experiences out in LA when he went to the Dodgers that helped him grow up. And when he came back to the Tigers, he was much easier to cover and much more pleasurable to cover because he was more mature.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tom, I got a great story to tell you at the Boston Garden. I'm on a busted up ankle because I got injured in a skiing accident on Christmas Day back in Magic Mountain. And ironically, you want to talk about a real irony. Billy Martin was killed in an automobile accident that night. I mean, every time I refer to that incident, I go to Billy Martin. Oh, that's when I busted up my ankle. But I'm going to the Boston Garden. Okay, get this. Okay. And, I had that situation with Bill Lambeer. I told Bill, hey, listen, Bill, just because you can afford your car payment doesn't mean I can afford mine. And I looked at it, and Dennis Rodman, being in a clubhouse setting, you have your friends in there. Some people are nicer to you than others. It's typical. But Dennis Rodman was one of my best friends, James Edwards, Isaiah, Joe Dumars, and a few others. But Dennis Rodman came to my defense, and it was just so neat. Said, Bill, get the daylights out of here. I'm trying to be nice about it. I don't want to throw expletives out there. And then Dennis and I went about our business, and Bill went to the other side at the Boston Garden. I'm thinking I'm in a fiberglass cast, Tommy, for 6 months because I had torn ligaments in my ankle. I wish I would have broken it, and it subsequently led to a couple of knee operations. So you talk about.
I'm going to mention a picture. This was post 1984, but I'm sure you guys remember this guy. He was a delight to cover, and that was Walt Terrell. And he was very just so down to earth. And I remember one time we went in it was the day that Sparky passed, became the all-time winning manager in Tiger history. That Danny Walden put up a sign and congratulated him in the dugout. And we all went in there, and the sign said, "Thanks, players. I couldn't have done it without you." So I went over to Walt and I said, "What do you think of that sign?" And he looked up at the sign and kind of stroked his chin, and he said, "He could have done it without me."
That is so funny.
Classic. Oh, classic.
That is good. All right,
the day that they traded for Walt Terrell during the winter meetings, I can't remember the year, but it was in Houston, and I called him, and he lived outside of Cincinnati, and I said, "I'd like to come by on my way home from Houston and interview you." And he said, "Well, that's fine." And he said, "I'll pick you up at the airport." And I thought that was really nice. And so I flew to Houston after the winter meetings, and he picked me up and he said, "You're going to come on over for dinner." And I said, "Oh, well, you don't have to do this, Walt. I just have a few questions to ask you." And he said, I said, "Well, I'll come on over. What's for dinner?" He said, "Wendy's." So we stopped at Wendy's on the way back to his house and went through the drive-through, and that was my introduction to Walt Terrell.
Wow, that's interesting.
Wow.
All right, Tommy, I want to talk about the Baseball Hall of Fame a little bit, but what we're going to address in this situation, I'm going to name like 4 people, 2 of which you're all too familiar with, about should-be Hall of Famers. And being in Southern Florida, the one person that stands out here is Don Mattingly. I know Dave Parker isn't in there. Mickey Lolich, Lou Whitaker, and they call it the Hall of Very Good. So can you comment individually about some of the four? And if you want to add a couple more, that's fine. Because once we go to Lolich, we're going to transition over to his book. But let's talk about Don Mattingly first. Should he be in the Hall of Fame?
I think he'll eventually make it. I don't know his stats by heart, Scott, but it was always my impression when I watched him play that I was watching a future Hall of Famer.
Yeah, Don Mattingly.
I think he will make it. Just like and well, you mentioned the others, and we'll discuss them one by one.
Sure. Well, Don Mattingly's numbers were comparable to Kirby Puckett's. The only problem with Don Mattingly, he's never gone deep into the postseason. That's a thing I really wonder about too. So I think Will Vogel's talking about Dale Murphy is another guy who I don't.
I think Dale Murphy will make it, and fairly soon.
I do too.
Yeah,
I do too. Soon. I'm still borderline with Mattingly, but Murphy for sure.
Yeah. So
I was borderline with Scott Rowland. I didn't vote for him. Yeah, I'm still a Hall of Fame voter, and I did not vote for him.
Really?
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what about Dave Parker?
That was back for the most part. He just played in the National League, and I didn't see him all that much. And I thought of him as a good player, but I never thought of him as a great player.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Dave Parker.
I thought Dave Parker. I thought he had some of the best stats of a player who's not in the Hall of Fame. And I remember his arm in from right field. And my impression, Scott, was that he was a Hall of Famer. I know there are some things that happened to him in his career that prevented people from voting for him. I don't think he'll make it, but when you talk about the best players not in the Hall of Fame, the Veda Pinson type players, that he's certainly high on that list.
Yeah.
Well, Todd Helton always intrigued me a little bit. I had a chance to meet Todd Helton many years ago when I was doing some Cactus League stuff, and I hope he does get in too, because Todd's a super class act.
I think he will. I think the MLB Network is a huge influence on behalf of players who are getting on in their eligibility, and that explains a big boost that a lot of them get.
Yeah, I know there's a million. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I know there's probably lots of people that we can talk about, and I'm not going to get into 9 million of them.
Yeah.
But some of the ones that stand out. But now let's go to the Tigers. What's kept Mickey Lolich from getting in the Hall of Fame? My goodness. I mean, here's a guy that's an innings eater, has so many strikeouts. And then when you think of the way his numbers are, albeit maybe he's just 30 games or so over 500, but this guy was a strikeout machine. He ate a lot of innings.
Yeah. I think Mickey himself thinks that his ERA was too high and that he will never make it. But I think he has a lot of credentials that you could point at and say, this was a pitcher from a different era. We'll never see that type of pitcher again. And he deserved, I think he's a border. If he made the Hall of Fame, I would not argue that he wasn't a Hall of Famer, because Mickey, when you pitch more than 300 innings, and he averaged more than 300 innings for several seasons in a row, you're just not going to see that again. You have pitchers now.
That's something that's never going to be repeated. And then what about his battery mate, Bill Freehan?
Right.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean,
Bill's never going to make it now.
He probably won't.
Well, and one thing people can't forget about Lolich, by the way, he only won 3 games in 68 World Series against a stacked lineup of the St. Louis Cardinals. And how many of those people went out there and made it to the Hall of Fame? I don't know, for some reason. And forget about the fact that Mickey Lolich is a guy that I idolize anyhow. And I'm going to tell you a funny story before you promote the book. If he didn't tell you, I'll tell it to you anyways. It wasn't so funny when it happened, but we got a chuckle out of it when it was all said and done. But, the thing is, the man won 3 World Series against a Cardinals team that won it, I believe, in 67, right, Tommy? And they were poised to repeat. The Tigers had other things to say about it. So, all right, well, let me go ahead and segue to that, Tom, okay? And it was nice of you that you were able to get Mickey and I together. We had a great time with him out here in here in Florida. But when I walked into Mickey's house, I'll never forget. Great greeting. It was just so much fun. We took our photos and all that. So I didn't see the door wall closed. So I walked into it and banged into the door wall and moved backwards. And Mickey and Joyce, they were so nice. You're all right? Well, it's just my eyes were not doing very good. And I banged into the wall. But no, we were good. I mean, it was just, we got a chuckle about it. He was more concerned how I was feeling. I was all right. I was all right. And then we started talking baseball. And obviously, we set up a show for a different network that, to me, thanks to you, by the way, Mr. Gage, put the whole darn thing together in the first place. And what I loved about it, what's that?
Go ahead. Oh,
that's okay.
I really enjoyed getting to know Mickey and writing that book with him. And I'm glad you mentioned Joyce, because she is such a nice person.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, and the thing about Mickey was, when we were doing the show, it was just so fun. I had my list of questions, and then you're going out there and texting me, get this out there. It was good because you knew far more about him than I did. And on my Facebook page, I have a picture with Mickey Lolich and myself, and I'm proud of that. And I don't mind letting everybody know about it either. Because
one of my favorite Mickey Lolich stories doesn't involve baseball. It involves how fast he'd like to drive. And after the season, he was given Look magazine hired him. I think it was Look. It might have been Life, but hired him to go around and because he was a World Series hero and stuff like that. They sent him on a tour of different places, and one of the places they sent him to was Daytona, and he loved visiting Daytona. And Bill France put him into one of the cars, and it was not one of the regular cars. It was just kind of a car that they had for celebrities to drive. But Mickey turned 3 laps at over 155 miles an hour, and he drove he would have qualified for his NASCAR rookie license. And afterwards, if Jim Campbell had known that NASCAR had put him into a car driving that fast, he would have absolutely gone crazy.
Like Jim Lonborg in the skiing accident, remember?
Yeah.
Jim Lonborg, the former Bo Sox pitcher, ruined his career skiing. I got to ask you, now that you mentioned that about Campbell, wasn't there a sore spot with Mickey and the Tigers? Something to do with playoff tickets and where they stuck him? Did he relate that?
That's where they put him behind the post and high up in the second deck,
right?
In '84, and it was shabby treatment for a previous star. World Series.
I couldn't believe that when that happened, Tom and Scott.
Yeah, good memory.
That he had obstructed view seats for the '84. Okay.
Yeah, obstructed view. He had to look around the post. Yeah.
So Tommy, I got a similar story to Mickey Lolich. You ready for this one? Okay. This past September, and I've got the certificate right there from Homestead Speedway, and I had an opportunity to get in a race car too. My good friend there was promoting it, Russell Branham. He's really become a good friend of mine, and he said to me when I was covering one of those pre-race things, media availabilities and all that. So he says to me, Scott, come here. I need to talk to you. Like, well, God, I do something wrong, right? No. You want to drive? I said, really? Are you joking? Because I was going to take a ride along either way. No, I'd rather drive. So I called my wife up and said, Candy, it's the best day of my life here. She said, what, over our wedding? I said, Candy, so I said, you don't understand, because she called me a crazy man, especially when I'm on the roads. I've been known to hit 90 miles an hour or more, a little bit, depending on 75, what stretch it is and all that. And I hope that cops aren't listening to this. And if they are, you don't know what I look like, and leave it alone. So I go around 11 laps over Homestead, and I topped 147.54 miles, going around 11, 12 laps around that track. And it was a blast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, to me, you talk about the ultimate adrenaline rush. My gosh, Tommy. I mean, put me behind it. Huh?
I imagine so.
Well, I mean, come on. Then you always say I was industrious. Well, I try to honor you by taking it to a new level and put my foot on the gas. I often joke around with people on the road. I'm the Dale Earnhardt of the interstate, and get out of my way. Why do you think I drive an SUV? Because I can see over it and turn the interstate into a chess match, especially when you're dealing with metropolitan New Yorkers. So, I love that story with Mickey, but this just happened recently in September. When you brought that, I got to bring this up to Tommy and George. So, all right. So now the opportunity, I want you to promote Mickey Lollich's book. I've looked at it, read it. Great book. And I'm probably going to splurge for another 1 or 2 copies. But this is just a heck of a book. And then what you're going to do is let everybody know how they can purchase it too.
Well, it was a fun book to write. It really was, because, Mickey certainly deserved a lot of credit for what he did. Yeah, but in the 68 series, but he had other good seasons that should have been gotten more attention than they did. And he just had a splendid career. He was he was the type of pitcher, as I said before, we'll never see again. You talk about, he was a definition of a workhorse, because a workhorse today throws 220 innings. A workhorse in his day threw 340.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And all those complete games that he had. And he, like he said, he was a workhorse, but he was so good at his craft. To think that he got those 3 wins in the World Series and bested the great Bob Gibson in the process.
Oh, and years later, George, he agreed to go to a signing session for autographs in St. Louis, and the Cardinal fans never forgave the Tigers at all, and so there were 2 lines. There was a line to have Gibson sign the autographs, and there was a sign for Lolich, and there was nobody in Lolich's line at all. And the line for Gibson was out the door. And Gibson stood up and said, "Hey, people, we've got the World Series hero of 1968 sitting next to me. How come nobody's in his line?" So it was a very gracious thing that Gibson did, because he was a great star and a great favorite of Cardinal fans.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tommy, why don't you let everybody know how they can get Mick's book?
Well, just nowadays, Scott, it's all on Amazon. It's Joy in Tigertown, and it's by Mickey Lollich, with me as the as told to, but it's still available. I know that because I got the royalty check today, and it was a fun book to write, and I hope to have as much fun with the Lollich with the Parrish book. And so far, it looks like it's going to be.
All right, so I want to go back to a couple Hall of Fame questions. Lou Whitaker, why hasn't he gotten in there yet either?
Well, the problem with Whitaker is the year he was eligible, initially eligible, Gibson and Parrish were also initially eligible, and the Tigers there were just too many Tigers on the ballot. I never thought he would be one and done. I didn't ever consider him at the time a first ballot Hall of Famer. And people will always say, "Well, wait a minute. How come you didn't vote for Lou Whitaker?" But it's just the way I look at a Hall of Fame ballot. Either you're an automatic first ballot guy, and we know who those players are. The guys who it's the Jeters, it's the and people like that. And I thought, I'll have time to vote for Lou Whitaker later. And I never had time to vote for Lou Whitaker later. And the problem now is, Scott, Alan Trammell got into the Hall of Fame because you go from the hundreds of writers who are voting to a 12-man committee. The Hall of Fame veterans, the different era committees, and they're either 12 or 16 members. And Whitaker, Trammell did a great job of making friends during his career because he's a friendly guy. So when it came time to be voted on by the committee, he had people like Robin Yount and George Brett maybe voting for him. He had guys who not only thought he was a fine player, but they also liked him personally. The problem with Whitaker is he didn't have that type of friends. He doesn't have that type of friendship working for him. You have people who might admire his career, but they don't have a special bond, a personal bond with him because they didn't know him. And Lou was just too aloof for his own good. And I volunteered, I pitched a book to him years later, thinking that might help his candidacy, but he didn't want to write a book because he's still too private a person. I'm not sure if he gets in, and I think it might happen someday, but it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Okay, let's go back to the chat room. Some other interesting questions. Glad we have a very active chat room. What about Darrell Evans?
Darrell Evans certainly was a fine player. He will not be a Hall of Famer.
Okay, and have you ever had much interaction with Denny McLain?
Oh, I know. Denny's a charmer. He's been a charmer all his life. I don't. If I know Denny. If he says to be somewhere at 11:30, I know that probably means noon. Denny. He's a very likable guy, but I can understand why some people came out of their individual relationships with Denny not really trusting his reliability. So again, when I see Denny, I'm always happy to see Denny, and I like him a lot. But he's an acquired taste that some people don't acquire.
And he's been real close to two sportscasters in Detroit, Eli Zared and Ron Cameron.
No, I know that. That, and I've kind of lost track of Eli. I read his book on the Tigers, and I think he did a good job.
Yeah,
and he did a good job, but always sending it back to George and now. But as you know, George, I know Ron pretty well, and he certainly is a character. He was a major sports voice in Detroit for a long time, and he's still a very active and sports critic, and but he knows his stuff. He really does.
Yeah.
So Tom, when we talk about the Hall of Fame a little bit, do you find that if certain players don't get along well with the media, that at some point it could hamper their chance of getting in? We know that Barry Bonds is a guy who's a really rough around the edges, if that's putting it lightly. And there's probably a lot of other guys as well. We know PEDs. And when I was recently at the Hall of Fame this past year, they mention it, but where David Ortiz was a charmer, and we know that there was a little PEDs there. Do you think there's ever going to be a day? Well, first of all, please answer the first part of the question about Barry Bonds. Had he have gotten along better with the media, do you think it might have helped his case just a little bit?
I don't think that's a determining factor, because if I said it just makes the voting block of writers look very petty. And I might be naive, but I just don't think we're that petty.
Okay, no problem. I'm glad you answered that. So when we talk about PEDs, do you think there will ever be a time where some of these guys ever get in as a new generation of voters starts to vote?
Yeah, I think they will, Scott. But it'll go beyond their eligibility years to get in through the writers. So it'll be taken over by their colleagues and other people who vote on the committees. My experience of voting for those players, I got to the point where I told myself, look, because at first I didn't vote for Bonds and I didn't vote for Sosa and stuff like that, but I got to a point, Scott, where I said, I'm not baseball's policeman. Right. It was legal. If they couldn't police their own eligibility, and it was steroids were not illegal in baseball. They knew what was going on. And I just thought, I'm not going to punish these guys for what they did within the realm of eligibility. So I eventually voted for bonds, and I especially voted, I never voted for
Sosa
or for McGuire, but I did vote for Bonds.
What about Roger Clemens?
Oh, I voted for Clemens. I thought he was a great pitcher.
Yeah.
And
Kurt Schilling's another one.
Yeah. Schilling wasn't quite the pitcher that I thought Clemens was. I thought Clemens definitely should be in the Hall of Fame.
Right. Could you ever see
on this ballot, on this past ballot, George, I also voted for Gary Sheffield. And there's a guy who's a fringe, a maybe not Hall of Famer who is penalized for whatever he did with PEDs. And I think that's the reason he doesn't get more votes than he does.
Yeah.
Could you ever see a time where Pete Rose ever gets in, maybe when he's long gone, as Ernie Harwell would say, posthumously?
No, I don't think so, Scott, because I think that's passed down as a legacy from commissioner. For him to get in, some commissioner is going to have to lift the ban, and I don't think there's a commissioner that would dare do that.
Okay, so let's move ahead a little bit to some of the MLB new rule changes. We talked about the pitch clock, the larger bases, the mound limit visitations, which we saw a little bit before, the 3-batter minimum. Are there any of these that you dislike, including the ones
I like speeding up the game because baseball has gotten too slow. It shouldn't be an automatic 3-hour plus game. And if you go to it really just had gotten too slow. I don't like the bigger base rule because, as somebody said, the bases now look like pizza boxes out there. And
funny.
I don't like that, and I definitely don't like the runner at second base in extra innings. I think they could have gone to a 10th inning. They should have played with the conventional rules through the 10th inning. I don't mind the attempt to save wear and tear on pitchers, but I don't think they had to go to it make it a rule as soon as they did. I don't like that because it changes the way the game is played and the way it affects the bullpen.
What about these combined no-hitters? Do you classify them as legitimate no-hitters? I mean, now we're seeing 2, 3. Yeah, me either. I mean, give me a break.
Where the starter goes 5 innings, and then the 2 relief pitchers go share
sometimes
the rest.
More than 2.
Yeah, sometimes more than 2.
Yeah, but remember, Tom, the Baltimore.
I don't like multiple pitcher no hitters. I really don't.
Yeah, okay. But it happened in '67. Tom, what was his name? Stu Miller from the Baltimore Orioles, or remember the Tigers were no hit in '67 by several.
It was a rarity, George, and now it's not that much of a rarity.
Yeah, it seems more normal here. So I got a couple of questions, Tommy. I really enjoyed having you on. Number one, tell me what the new numbers would be like to get in the Hall of Fame. I don't know whether 3,000 hits or 300 wins are going to constitute it anymore, but is there a new number criteria that would fit this era?
Yeah, I think 3,000 hits is still a good hallmark for the number of hits it would take. But, speaking of 3,000, I always thought 3,000 was a good combination for RBIs and runs scored together. Because you look at the great players, and they usually combine. They combine for 3,000 runs scored and RBIs together. When Tony Perez was finally, I hadn't voted for Tony Perez for a long time, but I all of a sudden began looking closer at his career, and I thought, this man drove in 1,500 runs. You know how many RBIs you have to average per year and for how long to drive in 1,500 runs. I think that's a great milestone. Anybody who drives in 1,500 runs should be considered for the Hall of Fame. I think 500 home runs is still a good number to shoot for. But in this day and age, with everybody swinging for the fences, I think it'll become much more reachable.
Are you glad that Fred McGriff finally got in?
It doesn't bother me. It doesn't please me. I mean, he was a good player. I thought he was a very good player. I look at the Hall of Fame as the Hall of Fame of the great, and I'm not sure he was great. I mean, he was excellent in many areas, but he had his chance to get in via the method that I was part of, and he never got in.
All right, couple more questions here. COVID-19 Zoom calls became the norm after a while. And what are your thoughts about what transpired during COVID-19 and all these Zooms? Because that'll lead me to my follow-up question.
What do you mean by that, Scott, in the Zooms?
Well, in other words, after a while, I think PR people, were you able to get involved with some of those Zoom calls with the Tigers and all that?
It changed entirely the way the game is covered. And, you know, I was in Lakeland last week, and I've talked to the writers who now cover baseball, and I feel sorry for them because they don't have the access that I had in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You know, there was a time when I rode their buses and I flew on their planes and I stayed in their hotels. And that's the way that you got to know the players. They would see you as, you know, on their different ways of travel. They would see you in the hotel lobby. And now it's, you know, I asked one of the guys, I said, what's your access to the players now? He said, well, we get in at 8:30, but we have to be out of the clubhouse by 9:30, which was basically the time that we used to get there, and we used to stay till noon. And so now they only have an hour access to the players before an exhibition game. And whereas we always had 3 hours, and we could interview a starting pitcher during the game. The clubhouse was never closed to us during the game, and now it is.
Yeah, and which leads me to where I'm going with this now. Thanks, Tom, because you lead into my points really great. So nowadays, it seems like the communications people have actually taken a lot of the COVID-19, and it's really made our job a lot more difficult. At least the one thing you mentioned, it was great when we were doing it, but I don't envy the new people now with the communications being more in charge, and you don't have the relationships that you built over the years. Now you have people that are just kids that are being paid whatever ways that they're going. But I think it's harder now, don't you? And they use COVID-19 and Zoom calls as a way to make it hard on us.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think it's harder to be a writer. I think it's harder to be a media relations person. And but that began to change towards the end of my career because certainly suspicious front office people would want to know what the players were saying before they saw it in the paper. So they would have their media relations people kind of eavesdropping in on the media sessions with the players. And as much as I like Dave Dombrowski, and I did like him, he would always assign a media relations person to listen in on what so-and-so was saying. So he got a heads up, you know, in case there was some sensitive things being said. So again, that began to change towards the end of my career.
All right. And my final question is this, and we're going to really bring it on a positive note. Tell me some of your favorite Detroit colleagues that you had an opportunity to work with over the years, whether it's a writer, whether it's broadcaster. I'll tell you a couple right off the top of my head. I love Joe Falls, Lynn Henning, Jerry Green. I'm probably taking a few years, aren't I?
Well, I was very close with Joe, and I was very close with Jerry. I'm very happy that John Lowe is being honored by the Hall of Fame this year. He had a wonderful career. John and I were not similar writers. John was, and this was a label of honor. It really was. He was a seam head. because he looked at the stats more than I looked at the stats. I wanted to get into the character of the players instead of. I remember somebody was saying that anytime you use numbers in a baseball story, it slows the reader down. And of course, you have to use numbers in a baseball story, but I didn't depend on numbers. But John covered the Tigers for 30 years or so as the writer for the Free Press. Scott, I'm still the chairman of the Detroit Baseball Writers, and I thought this chapter has to nominate him. So we nominated him for the Lifetime Achievement Award back in December, and thankfully he got it, and he'll be honored by the Hall of Fame next year. So he was a delight to cover baseball with, as was Danny Nobler, who's now in Thailand and has a sports bar in Thailand.
Wow.
I'm going to mention somebody I don't think you cared for, Scott, and that was Jim Hawkins. But
well, that's a new statement, but go ahead.
Jim Hawk is still one of my good friends. He lives in St. Pete now, and he rubbed some people the wrong way, but I thought he was a fine baseball writer and a very entertaining person. Brian Bragg wrote for the Free Press, and he was fun to cover with. And and then the late Vern Plagenhoff, who was an excellent writer, and he got along with the players in a way. He looked at the game and felt the game in a way I could only envy, and he died way too young.
Well, let me tell you this, Tom. Okay, Jim Hawkins rubbed me the wrong way at the '81 baseball winter meetings. I was just a pup there. I really was. You know me. I was really young. I was skinny.
We've had this discussion before, and I saw Hawk this last week a couple of times, and I think he would probably still rub you the wrong way. You know, but I know him, and I admired the way he and Hawk back in the day was a lot more tougher. He was a lot tougher to get along with than he is now. He's mellowed, and he's a good friend.
Well, more power to you. You got along with him. I actually bumped into him once in a Las Vegas airport. I knew who he was, and we had a bit of a discussion then. And I don't
think you held back. I think you eventually told him that you didn't like him, and I think he said thank you or something like that.
No, you're right. Hey, listen, you know what, Tommy? You know me really well anyway, so I'm not going to sit here and it is what it is. I was just a young puppy, but one of my good positive influences at that winter meetings was Tommy, and you probably know him really well. And I got to know John Lowe because I did a lot of stuff with the Dodgers at Vero. But one of my favorite people of all time was Phil Pepe of the New York Daily News. Oh my God,
Phil Pepe, really?
Yeah, I swear. He was.
Yeah,
why did you?
I knew Phil a little bit, not too well.
Well, I got a couple more for you, Tom.
Well, here, hold on, George.
Yeah.
What was so nice about Phil, though, Tommy, was the Yankees were playing in Fort Lauderdale, and Phil would always give me pointers and tips, and it was really nice. Yeah, hey, listen, I don't have anything personal against Jim Hawkins. He's a friend of yours. It's okay. I get it. Not everybody gets along. I understand. But I was just a young pup, and you were nice to me. I mean, my God,
I knew that Hawk didn't treat you the way that he should have, and I chastise him to this day. I said, Hawk, you didn't treat people the way you should have, and he said, well, he basically just says, well, that's the way I was. And it's not the way he is anymore.
Well,
he's not. That's not to say you would like him, Scott, now, but he's not as he was a young curmudgeon, and now he's older. He's less of a curmudgeon.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you this much, Tommy. If you and I and Hawkins ever get together, and he saw the 60-year-old version of Scott Morganroth versus the 18-year-old version, there'll be a little bit of hair, there'll be a little bit more weight. Obviously, what can I say? But I have a feeling it would be a bit of a different discussion, especially with the three of us. I mean, I'm not saying everybody's got to like
me. Maybe so.
Oh, I don't know. Hey, I'm not worried. Hey, if he's a good friend of yours, more power to you. I may not like abandon it to winter meetings because you and I became friends, and that's all that matters to me. I mean, and I met a lot of good people there. I was just a young guy trying to get established in baseball a little bit, maybe a little hyper aggressive at the time. Then again, aren't you at 18 years old anyways? Probably. I don't know. Go figure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love Phil Pepe though. He was
Wow.
great. He was. What can I say? Am I overstating my cause to you, Tommy, at all about the whole thing?
Again, I didn't know Phil, so I can't really comment. I didn't know him that well. He was one of the New York writers who was kind of distant because the New Yorkers of 1981 had a big time team to cover, and the Tigers were, we were just a pipsqueak little media contingent. And they were big, they were the big back, Yankee contingent. But there were a lot of guys in that who covered the Yankees. Moss Klein back then for Newark, and Bill Madden. And to this day, some of those guys are still good guys to me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts about new media nowadays, Tom? You got podcasting, you have everything on the planet. Do you think it helps, hurts a game? Or do you feel like you got it out of it at the right time? I know it's a new way of doing things.
I'll answer it this way, Scott. I got out of it at the right time. I value my time, the many years I had as a journalist, because I was able to cover. I was able to cover the players with access. Now I think a lot of it is kind of advocate. So much of TV coverage is highlights, and if you can't say something nice, don't say anything. And that's not the way objective journalism is. I mean, it should be. I mean, if you can't say something nice, it's only because something else happened. A lot of people thought the old time journalists were negative, but it was because they just were calling it, seeing it the way it was. And and the same thing took place in TV. A lot of the old time Detroit broadcasters were much more objective than they are now, because you know that, George. Dave Dodge,
Al Ackerman. Well, Ray Lane wasn't really that critical of anybody.
Who wasn't?
Ray Lane wasn't very critical, I don't think.
He wasn't.
Privately, he might have been.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can tell you right now, the people I learned a lot from were Charlie Vincent, Lynn Henning, and Joe Falls. I mean, those guys are just, and of course, I didn't get to know George Kell and Al Kaline a lot, but I know that I enjoyed watching them, and Tiger baseball has such a great history. It's incredible. And, I'm with you. I don't really like new media. It's what we have to work with these days, but I was always taught by Tony DeMarco, was my first mentor, to be very objective. And, nowadays, if you're a columnist, you're established enough, then you can put opinions. And what we even try to do, Tom, I don't know if you've ever heard this philosophy, but we write stories, then we also incorporate the podcast in there, try to shorten the stories and let the people do the talk. And that's what we've tried to do.
Well, the style of delivery has changed. I mean, back, I could easily say that columnists today are more feature writers than they were. But, back in the day, Joe Falls and Jerry Green had opinions every day. And I don't think columnists today express those opinions as strongly as they used to. But that was just the style of writing back then.
Right.
I mean, Joe, remember Friday fish fry, when Joe would have about 40 opinions of what he liked and didn't like in one column. And a lot of people thought it was frivolous, but I enjoyed the hell out of it. I really did.
And don't forget, he'd always talk about the food. The food.
Well, you know what, Tommy? Now that you mentioned this about Falls, I got to tell you, I know we're running a little bit over time. I hope you're all right for a few more minutes anyways. But I'll never forget the time over at Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. I'm covering the Lions at the time. And, I was just, I have a poker face too, especially when I got a little bit older, now we're probably in my 30s when this happened. So I go to Joe. He's sitting right next to me. He said, Joe, I have a real strong feeling that the Atlanta Falcons, according to my sources, are going to take Elvis Gurr back. So, Scotty, I need to hear more about this. Okay. What do you know that I don't know? And I'm looking at him with this straight, you talk about a pale poker face if I ever had one. So I put my arm around Joe. I said, here's the situation, but you can't tell nobody. Okay. That's just a feeling. Okay. And I told him the reason why the Falcons are going to go ahead and draft Elvis Gurr back because Jerry Glanville tried to leave will call tickets to Elvis Presley. He didn't pick him up, so he wanted an Elvis, and he was going to go ahead and take Gurr back. And Joe looked at me like, wow. I mean, he got you want to talk about one of the most unbelievable laughs. Joe said that was good, and I mean I played him there, but that's the kind of guy that he was. I mean, Joe to me was like a father figure. He never rubbed me the wrong way. If anything, he was always building my confidence up. But now that you talk about the way things are, I had to tell you this story, Tommy. I really did. So what can I tell you?
Well, Joe was a special person. He really was. And he, a lot of people thought he was, again, not they knew him at the end of his career when he might have been a little bit too much Friday fish fry, but he would. Joe Falls was a heavy hitting journalist who had a great career.
Yeah, and he was rewarded with the Spink Award back then, as it was called.
He was.
It took him a long time though to get it, Tom.
Yeah, it did, and he, but true to form, Joe stood up at a gathering at the Hall of Fame, and he stood up and there were a lot of Hall of Famers in the room, and he said, "Well, it's about time." And but Joe was he was blustery. He had an ego, but he also had great talent.
Yeah, well, sure.
Well, Tom, you know what? Let's not kid ourselves as we wrap this thing up. But before we do that, I just want to let everybody know one more time that Fire Up can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. So whether you're walking, driving, whatever, that's how you can do it that way. Also, please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube. It's really easy. South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. Also, you want to be a guest? No problem. Send topic ideas to South Florida Tribune at gmail.com. And if you want to advertise, okay, call 954-304-4941. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn,
hey, Scott,
Twitter.
I just want to say something about you because George and I both knew you when you were that young pup just getting started. But you've made you've really worked hard and you made a lot out of your career, and I really admire what you've done with your career.
Thanks, Tommy. You know what? People like you make me who I am. I only learn. Hey, listen, I hope people that subscribe to our YouTube channel and see it live can appreciate what a real class act you are. Because you know what? Everybody gives me credit, but you know what? I won't take any of it. Only the reason why I won't, Tommy, because I had to have some really good teachers. You know what? At a time of my life, you were there to show me the ropes. You were there anytime I needed to talk to you. So I'm only as good as my mentors, Tommy. And you know what? To me, you're a Hall of Fame person and a Hall of Fame writer in so many different ways. I should also point out to you, though, Tom, and it just came to my mind as you were saying those kind words. When you think of Hall of Fame writer Tom Gage, how proud of you are you when you think? How proud are you when it comes down to knowing that you're a Hall of Famer and you are with the greats of all times, that a part of you still exists in a big way at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown? Because I've been there a few times, and every time I go out there and look at that sign, I even took a few pictures of you there. And I told my wife, I'm proud of this guy, man. More than me. But you're a Hall of Famer, Tommy. And this is what I want people to know.
Scott, I have to say, to win that award was a great honor, and it changed my life and continues to change my life. But and it also really, I was in we go to Indian Rocks Beach in Florida, and I was in the pool last week, and we've got to meet some people who are from Clinton Township, and he said, "Well, what do you do in your career?" And I said, "Well, I was a baseball writer, and I covered the Tigers for a long time for the Detroit News." And he looked at me and he said, I read every one of your stories." And
Wow.
that I think I had an impact on somebody who would say that to me years later, meant I really reached somebody. My style of writing was, hey, pass the newspaper around at the breakfast table. Hopefully I wrote for somebody, from mom and pop and for the kids too. And, I just love the finding out that I really was able to reach the good fans of Detroit.
So I need you to do me a favor, Tom. Okay, I need you to tell Mickey Lillage. Not only did I go to the Daytona 500 a few weeks ago, but I really want you to tell Mickey. Okay, and I know you will. Is that I covered the Rolex 24 hours is what I did. I stayed up 30 hours in a row to cover it before, pre and post. And when I went out there and pulled that off, I thought that was the greatest accomplishment I've ever done, to be able to cover an event for 30 hours in a row. And now I'm a junkie on endurance racing. If I could do 24 there, I could do it. And what was interesting, Tommy, is I ended up writing a story and doing a video with a guy who's covered 89 24-hour races, and I said, give me some tips how to do one for me. And it was just I wrote a combo story and video. So tell Mickey that the next time he goes to Daytona, okay, let's see if he can tackle the Rolex 24. And if he does that, I'll go out there and buy him dinner wherever he wants if we can pull that off.
Yeah. And
but
George,
anyways,
I've known you a long time. I've been in the press box many times with you, and it's it's a delight to see.
Good to see you again. Yes.
Well, I got to tell you one last thing, Tom. I've hit the 60 mark too, and I feel like I've done an awful lot. I could see in 1 or 2, 3 years, as I start to see access diminish a little bit, that I'm like you, Tommy. I went out there and covered it, was good. So whatever happens for me going forward, I think about what you just said. I feel like I have maybe, I'm going to pick and choose where I want to go and let off the gas and enjoy life a little bit more, but not let good opportunities go ahead and pass me by. And I'm kind of where you're at this point, Tommy. And I don't know where it goes, but I know one thing, friendships are forever. And 1981, I hit a grand slam home run there, Tommy, meeting you. I mean, you're like Muhammad Ali. You're the greatest as far as I'm concerned, buddy.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, so this is part of a program where we let everybody know they get a hold of you. Tommy, you want to put some contact information? I follow you on Twitter. Now you have my Twitter information, so I can share the show to you. But
Twitter, but I don't post much. I read I just use it as a source of news and to read what, it's like Facebook. I don't post a lot on Facebook either, but I read, I keep up with you, Scott, a lot on Facebook. You're on quite a bit. And you post a lot on Facebook. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I do put a lot on there. What I only use Twitter for, Tommy, is just to share content stories. I'm not big on opinions. It's not my goal is on Twitter, only one thing, Tommy, and that's just go out there and share information with people, tag them. Otherwise, I really only use it for that purpose. I don't really get too personal. I really have zero desire to do it. But yeah, I do post on there. But, to me, like I said, I mean, social media has a role, and you have to pick out what social medias you use and what purpose that you do. But you want to let everybody know how they get a hold of you, and you want to plug Mickey's book one more time?
Well, the name of the book is Joy in Tiger Town, and it's on Amazon. I am on Twitter at Tom_Gage. And, it's always a delight to hear from and I'm on Facebook, but it's always a delight to hear from the good fans of the Tigers and of any Detroit sport. In 1999, Scott, I had a chance to take over the Red Wing beat because I've always loved hockey. It was It was mine if I wanted it. And I knew Comerica Park was going to open the next year, and I turned it down for two reasons. I didn't want to be working heavily during the winter when my son was only 13, and I wanted to be home during the school year instead of, I also wanted to be covering the Tigers when they moved out of Tiger Stadium and into Comerica Park. To this day, though, I miss Tiger Stadium. I'm not one who thinks that it should still be standing because, you know, it had its day. And there were enough times I would sit in the stands and wonder what was dripping on me. And, you know, it was a leaky old ballpark, but it was a ballpark.
Well, I'll say one thing about Tiger Stadium. The only opening day I went to was actually the final one, and then obviously and then I went to the final at Tiger Stadium '99 when Fick hit that. And I'd say if there's a day I could freeze in time, it'd be that. And I'm actually working on trying to get Willie Blair on here as well. I'll probably do it up in Daytona Beach, but I know he was the opening day pitcher for the final one up at Tiger Stadium. He's going to be happy when he sees that you and I and George had this conversation. But yeah, Tiger Stadium is iconic. And what can you say? All the places in the history from Charlie Garrett. I mean, well, we're not going to go any further. I think we've covered that pretty well. So George, why don't you let everybody know how they go? You know, also talk about your book, and we'll and we appreciate Tommy.
Yeah, I got a book out there too, Tom. Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air, featuring the likes of Ernie Harwell, George Kell, Ray Lane, Paul Carey, Ty Tyson, and all the gang from Tigers.
Oh, wow.
And it's an easy read. It's available at Amazon.com. There's a link to it on the South Florida Tribune website and the Motor City Tribune. I write for that, and the Detroit Monitor. Scott's in the book, and you know what, Tom? Scott's in there with two guys that certainly are Hall of Famers, Jimmy Connors in one picture and Muhammad Ali in another picture.
Wow.
You know, Ernie was funny. The only thing Ernie would allow me access to was, you got to go to the Burton Historical Museum. And believe it or not, Tom, I had to take photographs of Ernie's collection because they would not loan that out to me. So the pictures I have in my book of Ernie are all reproductive photographs. But I tell you what, I was a damn good photographer, and I took really good pictures. You wouldn't be able to tell that it was a repro picture. Now, Paul Carey, when I went to Paul's house and visited him and Nancy, Paul opened up all his albums, photo albums, and I could borrow any pictures I wanted from him. But Ernie, of course, as you know, donated everything to that Burton Historical.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Paul Carey, though, George, because what a wonderful person he was.
Terrific guy, a friend of all of ours.
Yeah,
years.
Hey, George, is any mention of Don Kramer in your book?
I know I mentioned him, but I don't know if there's a picture of him in there. There might be. I have a picture of all the Tiger announcers.
He was a Channel 4 sports guy for a lot of years when I was growing up. Don Kramer. Yep.
Don Kramer then became the Lions PR director.
Yeah,
well, when you talk about Tommy, when you talk about local TV broadcasters, it's funny how you mentioned. I probably told everybody we're going to sign off, but you're just too interesting to keep me long-winded. But you know, talk about some of the regular sportscasters you dealt with. Don Shane, Dave Dials. There were so many great television broadcasters there. What was it like dealing with some of those guys? I mean, we all love Don Shane, and of course, you know, there's a lot of other ones. I've been away for so long that, you know me, I was covering spring training from 81 to 86, was there 11 years, and bingo, I'm gone again. But that's why I didn't get as many opportunities.
I have to say, with the Tigers were not the attraction after 1984 for almost 30 years that they were in the 80s. And so a lot of the TV guys didn't come to the ballpark that much. You know, we would, and so you know, like Bernie would come out once in a while, and he would come to spring training, and Don Shane would do the same thing. But you wouldn't see them at the ballpark a lot. Yeah, in his retirement, I would see Sonny Elliott a lot, and it was always fun to see Sonny there. But we didn't see the current guys.
Well, just so you know what I'm doing these days, Tommy, I built the South Florida Tribune from scratch. It's a digital publication with a broadcast division. This is my baby. My wife, Candy, she is one that puts a lot of it, the controlling part together. I try to assemble the shows as well as find the content. So that's what I'm doing these days. I own this publication, South Florida Tribune. It's www.southfloridatribune.com. There's a broadcasting division. And again, we're building through YouTube and all the different providers to get the words out there as well. So, and we have another little Motor City Tribune, which is good too, that George pretty much handles a lot of the things back there. So we were able to create enough interest to put together a Michigan show. So, I always try to find different ways to stay involved in the business as much as I can. But the one thing I'll always say is, while I live in Florida, Tommy, I'm a Metro Detroiter no matter what. I'm wearing a USF cap because it's my alma mater. It's not the Michigan Wolverines, but any university that's named the Bulls, dealing with a bull. And I did get this called a class ring. It's the worst thing on the planet. But you know what? Yeah, I wish I would have had more time to go out there and cover the Tigers when I was in Metro Detroit. But you know me, I've been a road warrior, Tommy. I'm just
you were never afraid of hard work. So, you worked hard.
Tommy, thank you so much for the kind words. You are just great. I appreciate that. I just work hard, do the best I can, and hope everything works out well. So, but it's been such a pleasure to have you on, Tommy.
It's really been a fun hour plus. But yeah.
Right. Well, I hope I can keep you past your bedtime, but you know what? I'm going to be contacting next year.
I'm still a night owl. And, my wife goes to bed at 10 and I go to bed at 2. So some things as a baseball writer, we're always getting home at 1 a.m. after our last stories, and some things never change. I'm still a night owl.
Yeah, you're a night owl.
Thanks for coming on, Tom.
Otherwise, media has changed. Thank God you were smart enough to get out of it at the right time. Me, I don't know why I'm doing it.
I got out of it when the Detroit News opened the door, but it wasn't entirely my intention to get out of it when I did. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, all I can tell you here on this great March 13th, 2023 on Monday night, great to have George and I here, but more importantly, Tom, what can I tell you? Look forward to seeing you when you come to Florida, and more importantly, look forward to catching up with you in Michigan. I'll be in contact with a couple business things that will work out very soon. But Tommy, you're the best, man, and you're my hero, Tom. That's pretty much what I have to say.
Well, thanks so much.
All right. Well,
thanks, Tom.
So on behalf of George Eichhorn and Tom Gage, this is Scott Morganroth, Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Fire Up Michigan, and special thanks to Jeremy Ballreich and Will Vogel for participating in the chat room. They were absolutely fantastic, and they had an opportunity to interact with a Hall of Famer, Hall of Fame person, Hall of Fame for him. God bless, Tommy. Thanks for being on again, partner.
You bet.
Good night.
Good night.